This program was produced with funds provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting through National Public Radio's Satellite Program Development Fund. The program was produced by Rebels Productions, which is solely responsible for its content.
Are you troubled? Confused?
Oh, man.
Do you worry that something awful has happened to Link and Julie from the Mod Squad?
I wonder what happened to Link and Julie.
Does it frighten you to live in a world where people invent things like pet rocks, famous Amos cookies, and Mr. Microphone? Do you believe everything is being affected by a multinational conspiracy?
So what?
If so, there is nothing wrong with you.
Really?
We understand. For the next 30 minutes, sit back, relax, and let us take control of your consciousness.
Hey, no way.
Because this is our
Hey, let me
stupid
go.
world.
Let me go! Hey! Let me go! Hey, wait a minute!
Hello and welcome to Mr. Handy's do-it-yourself guide to getting everything you could possibly imagine done around the house while strengthening your abdominal muscles and learning French. And here's the star of our show, Mr. Handy.
Hi, handy people. Ready to go to work?
Ready to go, Mr. Handy.
Last week, we fixed those squeaky hinges, adjusted our income taxes, built a solar deck over the back porch, prepared a 12-course dinner party, added surround sound to our VCR viewing center, and repainted the house. This week, we're going to be a little more ambitious. Think we can handle it, handy people?
If you help us, Mr. Handy.
Okay, then. Let's go. Let's take out our checklist. Let's see. What's first?
Dear, we're scheduled to convert the aviary to a hydroponic super garden.
Right. But first, let's put on our French lessons.
Catherine parle à Jean-François.
Come on now, let's go into the living room. The speakers seem to be functioning here in the living room. Let's move into the bedroom now. The left speaker doesn't appear to be working. Get out your soldering irons and let's get going. But we can't forget about those abdominal muscles. So let's strap the inversion boots on Mrs. Handy and hoist her up.
A little higher, dear.
Mrs. Handy is hanging in an inverted position just above the speaker. Now, like Mrs. Handy, make sure you lift and hold your upper torso while doing the soldering.
How are you doing, honey?
Fine, dear. I almost have it.
See that you don't touch the suspension lines with the soldering iron. We wouldn't want the heavy speaker falling on Mr. Handy's head.
What was that, dear?
Now that the speaker has fallen on Mr. Handy's head, we can practice up our surgical techniques with the Mr. Handy homemade quick and easy suture kit. We'll lower Mrs. Handy down a few feet so she can fix Mr. Handy's head. Here's the suture kit, dear.
Thank you.
As you remember, this procedure is very similar to the appendectomy we performed on Mr. Handy 3 weeks ago. Only this time, we don't have to remove any sensitive organs.
Hold still.
Mrs. Handy's technique has improved a great deal, don't you think?
It's like darning socks. Learning to knit and purl quickly makes Novocaine unnecessary.
Almost finished?
Putting in the last suture, dear.
As Mrs. Handy puts in the last suture, let's turn our attention back to the fallen speaker. Now that it's on the floor, it will be much easier to fix. Since Mrs. Handy is almost finished suturing our head, she can utilize her free hand to repair the damaged speaker. Ouch!
Sorry, dear. I was momentarily confused.
One of the things we have to be careful of is not allowing the left hand to forget what the right hand is doing. Mrs. Handy's left hand forgot the suturing wasn't finished and accidentally soldered over Mr. Handy's sore wound. Sometimes it's best to complete one task before beginning another.
The speaker's working.
When putting the soldering iron away, make sure you don't put it between the positive and negative poles. This can short out the speaker. I think that's what Mrs. Handy has just done.
But I continue to strengthen my abdominal muscles.
Since we won't be working in the bedroom today, our French lessons can continue on the speakers in other areas of the house. Next week we'll repair the speaker and hang it back on the ceiling. Ready to come down, dear?
Lower away.
Now that Mrs. Handy is back in the upright position, we'll move through the wall we tore down last month. Your face is awfully flushed, Mrs. Handy.
I feel a little dizzy.
You're not going to fall, are you, dear? Mrs. Handy must have stood up too quickly. It's important to be steady on your feet before going on to other tasks.
Dear, don't walk into that charred 2x4.
Oh, just missed my eye.
Mr. Handy forgot to look where he was going.
It's always a good idea to be oriented to the workplace before getting started. Let's step through the wall into the aviary.
The speaker seems to be working fine here in the aviary.
As we said earlier, today we're going to convert the aviary into a hydroponic garden. What exactly is hydroponics, Mrs. Handy?
It's a way of growing plants without soil.
Hydroponics is easy and fun. To begin the conversion, Mrs. Handy will begin unpotting our plants. By turning the whole plant over and shaking vigorously, the plant falls out effortlessly.
As you might notice, Mrs. Handy is starting with the potted palms.
This helps build up lower back and abdominal muscles.
And because it's a simple task, she can concentrate on her French while doing it. Since we won't be needing the clay pots anymore, Mrs. Handy will throw them out the window onto the Mr. Handy general-purpose garbage chute. Unfortunately, Mrs. Handy missed our program on building the Mr. Handy general-purpose garbage chute and just threw one of the huge clay pots onto Mr. Handy's new BMW.
The lessons of handiwork are often learned the hard way.
Next month, we'll fix the garage door and put the new BMW where it will be protected.
After we replace the hood.
That should cost a pretty penny. Now let's throw the pots into the Mr. Handy Jumbo Deluxe Trash Master. Let's turn it on. Seems to be jammed.
I guess we'll have to drive to the dump, dear.
A visit to the dump can often yield surprising finds.
If it wasn't for the dump, we wouldn't have learned how to reupholster our lovely living room furniture.
To build our hydroponic garden, we'll need a few things. We'll need 2 tons of stainless steel, rivets, a blowtorch, and, of course, safety items.
Watch out, dear. I'm going to start the blowtorch.
You must be careful not to ignite your blowtorch near flammable liquids. Mrs. Handy is far too close to the paint thinner we forgot to put away. A fire this size won't be a problem with the Mr. Handy do-it-yourself, safe and easy fire extinguisher.
Dear, we used the extinguisher during our Parisian cheese fondue program.
I guess we'll have to call the fire department. Always have emergency numbers near the phone. Where's the emergency numbers, dear?
We took them down after we programmed the Mr. Handy We Don't Need Marble Touchtone Memory Phone.
How stupid of me. Our emergency numbers are already pre-assigned. All we have to do is press this button, and the phone automatically locates and dials the fire department.
Transworld Airlines.
I must have pushed the wrong button. Let's try again. It's ringing. The beauty of this system is that even if you make a mistake, it's much faster than the conventional touch-tone phones.
Hello?
Is this the fire department?
No. Who's this?
The fire's really spreading fast now, dear.
Would you happen to have the fire department's number?
What, is this some kind of joke?
Hurry, dear.
Look, we're having trouble with our phone. Would you mind calling the fire department for me?
Sure.
Thanks. It's nice to know that people still care about one another. While we're waiting for the fire department, let's move down our list and go on to the next chore.
To the basement, where we can put the finishing touches on the Mr. Handy Home nuclear reactor.
The nuclear reactor can be very convenient during power outages.
Not to mention cost-efficient during off-peak hours.
As you remember, the essential feature of safe nuclear power is the cooling system. We've had trouble with the cooling system so far, but today we're going to try our hand at fixing it. The only tools we'll need are a monkey wrench, a 22 AZ spigot, and a little patience. To test our cooling system, we'll need lots and lots of water.
Much more water than is available to the average household.
That's why we've rerouted all the local fire hydrants into our home.
This has maximized our water pressure.
It's important not to use this system when there's a fire in the neighborhood. This can jeopardize the safety of others.
Ready to turn on the water, dear.
Stand back, there could be leaks in the system.
We seem to have a break in the main water line, dear.
Let's turn off the water and repatch the main line.
I can't turn off the main line, dear. Must be something wrong with the faucet.
Well, this looks like another problem for professionals. While Mrs. Handy calls the plumber, we'll move back upstairs to begin work on the Mr. Handy do-it-yourself austerizer. There seems to be activity going on upstairs.
The fire department must be here.
Gee, that was fast.
Yes, dear.
We'll have to work around the firemen, but that shouldn't present any major problems. Remember, practice your French.
And keep tightening those abdominal muscles by pushing out on the diaphragm and holding your breath for 10 seconds.
If you do this while climbing the stairs, as Mrs. Handy is doing, you'll increase the muscle activity and get better tone.
Here's the Mr. Handy austerizer, just where we left it.
Let's put the blade in. Make sure the Mr. Handy austerizer isn't plugged in while you do this.
Hold the blade still, dear, while I tighten the outside nuts.
Mrs. Handy is tightening down the nuts with a small adjustable wrench.
All done, quick and easy. Let's test it.
Wait, dear, let me get my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem, dear. We'll take care of the damage with the Mr. Handy Bionic Appendage Repair Kit. Using advanced microchip technology, we reconstruct the hand using mechanical parts and a small Atari home computer.
I'm strapping the computer onto Mr. Handy's back.
The extra weight on this portion of my torso will help strengthen my abdominal muscles each and every time I bend over.
Here's a helpful tip. When you finish connecting the bionic hand, you can test its sensitivity by gently touching it with a soldering iron. Did you feel that, dear?
Yes, darling. The bionic hand seems to be responding well.
Make sure you don't touch any of the magnetic parts of the hand while making the tests. This can cause the red, hot soldering iron to stick to the hand and cause a great deal of pain.
Turn off the computer.
See? The soldering iron is now firmly stuck to Mr. Handy's hand.
Dear, turn off the computer.
Good idea, dear. This will prevent Mr. Handy from lapsing into shock or unconsciousness.
Thank you, dear.
An unconscious mind is an inactive mind.
Right you are, darling. What's next?
Tree surgery.
As you might remember, we're ready to begin harvesting our maple trees. Got to get those hardwood floors in, right, dear?
There's nothing quite like putting in a hardwood floor.
To do this, we'll need a chainsaw, some climbing gear, and lots of rope to pull the trees away from the house.
Climbing is an excellent way to strengthen not only the abdominal muscles, but the thigh and upper arms as well.
As Mrs. Handy puts on the climbing gear, I'll oil and gas the chainsaw with our new bionic hand. The hand seems to be working well. The chainsaw can be a very dangerous tool, so we have to be careful. I should have the chainsaw going by the time Mrs. Handy gets to the top of the tree. How are we doing, Mrs. Handy?
Almost at the top, dear.
Mrs. Handy has developed into an excellent climber.
It's those strong abdominal muscles. Dear, make sure the choke's on.
Ah, yes, I forgot to put the choke on. There she goes. Communication between the person on the ground and the person at the top of the tree is essential. Are you ready to pull up the chainsaw, dear?
What?
I'm going to put the chainsaw on the rope now.
Make sure the chainsaw's off, dear.
What?
Make sure the chainsaw's off.
The chainsaw seems to be magnetized to Mr. Handy's bionic hand. My finger is stuck to the trigger. Don't pull up the chainsaw yet, dear. Mrs. Handy must not have heard me clearly. She's begun to pull up the chainsaw, but her task is much harder now because she not only has to bear the weight of the chainsaw, but also the weight of Mr. Handy. Now that the chainsaw and Mr. Handy are at the top of the tree with Mrs. Handy, we'll practice our rappelling technique. First, make a monkey knot, like this. Make sure the tail of the rope is long enough to pull up and stop your descent. Otherwise, we'll end up in a free fall from the top of the tree. Does this look right, dear?
Looks right to me.
So, now we let go of the tree, pull down on the tail of the rope, and off we go!
Are you all right, dear?
Okay, dear. I might have broken my leg.
We'll put a splint on it after I fill the top of the tree.
It's important to get out of the way of the tree when topping it. Hold on, dear. One rule of thumb in tree work is never work on trees with major physical impairments. Quickness is necessary for one's survival. I'm dragging myself out of the way as quickly as I can, but I don't think it's going to be in time.
Are you all right, dear?
Just a few scratches. Good thing it didn't hit the house. As Mrs. Handy demonstrates the proper method of descent, we'll get out our 46-inch chainsaw so that Mrs. Handy can cut the tree from the base.
Did you check the pulling rope, dear?
It looks fine, dear.
Then what are we waiting for?
As Mrs. Handy makes her bed cut, we'll take up the slack on the pull rope. This can be accomplished by walking 20 yards behind the tree and holding it taut. Use the strength in your lower torso to keep strengthening those abdominal muscles. Ready! As Mrs. Handy saws through the back of the tree, we can begin pulling harder on the rope. As the tree begins to fall, we use principles of leverage to pull the tree away from the house. Unfortunately, Mrs. Handy has put her bed cut on the house side. Because of this, we're losing total control of the tree and are unable to keep it from crashing into the house. I guess we'll have to rebuild that portion of our home. This will give us a chance to practice up on our architectural skills. As Mrs. Handy mills the wood from the maple, we'll make a simple blueprint. The simpler, the better. Get out a blank piece of paper and make a square. Now, put little lines where you want the rooms to be. Make lines for the plumbing and electricity, and voila, we have a home. Let's start building.
Il s'appelle François.
As Mrs. Handy fires the nail gun, I will turn on the Mr. Handy all-purpose wood hander so that she can get into a smooth and rhythmic flow.
As she turns around, notice that she keeps the tip of the gun aimed away from Mr. Handy.
If she were to forget this and accidentally pull the trigger, Mr. Handy could be seriously injured. Using some of the French we've learned, I'll ask Mrs. Handy how she's doing. Comment tu fais avec les projets?
Je ne te comprends pas, amour.
Mrs. Handy says she doesn't understand. Utilise le gun avec caution.
Pardon? Apologies, mi amor. You aren't hurt, are you?
I think it went right through.
Il s'appelle François.
No, dear. The tip's sticking out just below your right shoulder blade.
We'll have to get it out. We'll use a pair of Mr. Handy's all-purpose pliers. Mrs. Handy places the pliers over the nail, locks the handle, and with a quick thrust, pulls the nail safely through the breastplate.
Quick, fun, and easy.
In time, you might be able to use these medical skills when you visit France. Let's go on to something a little less dangerous, shall we, dear?
Perhaps we could go into what's left of the house and fix the toaster.
The fire's out, but we still got some PCP still somewhere up there. I'm not sure how that happened. Good PG&E, and we're gonna have to...
I see the firemen have just about finished putting out the fire in the aviary. Good work, gentlemen.
You folks shouldn't leave dangerous chemicals lying around the house like that.
What were you people doing with PCBs in the house?
We were building an alternative power line for the video and stereo entertainment center.
All right, boys, it's PG&E's mess now. Good night, folks.
Good night, folks.
Here's the toaster. Good thing it was stored away in the Mr. Handy smoke-proof convenience closet. When working with the toaster, it's important not to plug it into a wall socket. This can cause you to be electrocuted.
Shouldn't we put a splint on your leg now, dear?
Yes, I'd almost forgotten. Why don't you put the splint on while I fix the toaster?
As Mrs. Handy works on Mr. Handy's leg, we'd like to remind you that next Sunday we have a special program. We'll teach you to raise and breed pit bulls.
It's a favorite hobby of ours.
Why don't we let Mr. Jaws in, dear?
Yes, let Mr. Jaws in before he tears apart the utility room door. That's something we don't want to have to fix again. Hey, Mr. Jaws, are you hungry?
I'll get him a side of beef.
Mr. Jaws loves raw meat. Dogs in general like meat.
We slaughtered and butchered the meat.
But let's not forget the toaster. While Mr. Jaws eats, let's find out why the pop timer isn't working properly. There's the problem. The ground is disconnected. By twisting the open ends of the wire leading to the timer to the popping mechanism, we simply need to wrap them around the ground spool and fasten securely with a screwdriver.
Dear, Mr. Jaws still looks hungry.
Well, give Mr. Jaws another side of beef. Fixing a toaster can seem like a little thing, but the satisfaction you get from having fixed it yourself can be extremely gratifying.
We're out of beef. Maybe he'd like some oatmeal.
A well-read pet owner knows that purebreds like Mr. Jaws can become psychotic when hungry. They begin to drool, like Mr. Jaws is doing now. Their eyes light up eagerly as though they want to eat you. They hunch up on their front legs, just like Mr. Jaws, and look as though they're ready to pounce. Fortunately for us, Mr. Jaws has had expert training from Mrs. Handy and myself. Honey, use the electric prod to get Mr. Jaws back into the utility room. Back! You can see how intelligent Mr. Jaws is. Rather than tear through the cast Mrs. Handy has administered to my right leg, Mr. Jaws went straight for the left.
I hope he didn't tear any arteries. Mr. Jaws is back in the utility room.
Good. Now we can test the toaster. Let's plug it in. There. It's working fine now. Boy, do I feel satisfied.
Dear, the wall's on fire.
Oh my, Murphy's Law. If anything can possibly go wrong, it probably will. Without the Mr. Handy do-it-yourself safe and easy fire extinguisher, I guess we'll have to call the fire department again.
Let's do it in the yard phone, dear. We wouldn't want to be injured by smoke inhalation.
Good thinking, dear. As the house burns to the ground, I'm reminded of something my father once told me. He said, son, if you don't have the time to do it right the first time, when will you have the time to do it right? I think the house burning down is an important lesson to all of us do-it-yourselfers. Take your time, or the damage you can inflict on your home and property can exceed the benefits and gratification of doing things yourself. Well, what are we going to do now that the house is burned down, dear?
Lay the concrete for the new foundation.
As Mrs. Handy mixes the concrete in the giant cement mixer above, I'll adjust the cement chute to the exact location where the concrete needs to be poured. The pit has been dug out at exactly 45-degree angles, straight up 20 feet. This straightness will ensure a strong, quick-drying foundation. She throws the switch and the concrete begins pouring. It comes out very rapidly, as you can see. The foundation fills up quickly. Make sure you've brought a ladder into the pit so that you can get out. Dear, could you throw down the ladder? Dear, turn off the concrete.
Using quick-drying concrete can save you time.
Dear, you're going to have to turn off the concrete now.
This time can be well spent by calling the insurance broker and purchasing additional life insurance on Mr. Handy. See, Mrs. Handy gets tired of doing all of Mr. Handy's work. Mrs. Handy has been begging Mr. Handy for years to have her own travelogue program where she could visit exciting places like Paris, France. Yes, Mr. Phillips, please.
We can discuss that travelogue you wanted to talk about, dear.
At times like this, funeral arrangements can be very trying. Good thing Mr. Handy and I dug our family plot last week. Hi, Jerry. Bags packed. 3 million more on the insurance. Great. See you at the airport, Sherry. We'll use the homeowner's insurance to take a trip to Paris, France, where we can practice our French. And to strengthen our abdominal muscles, we'll take some private aerobics classes with Monsieur Géry. Au revoir.
Au revoir, Mrs. Handy. Bye, Mr. Handy. Next week, live from Paris, France, Mrs. Handy will tell you how to see Europe on $400,000 a day. Have a good trip, Mrs. Handy.
Hello, and welcome to another segment of Mouth Off, the talk show that gets you in big trouble. And here's the host of Mouth Off, Herman Gunk.
All right, you're on the air. What's your beef?
I'd like to talk about price fixing by the oil industry.
Okay, wait a minute. Save your breath, buddy. You're no doubt one of those imbecilic conspiracy theorists. Let me take the words out of your mouth. 1, the oil industry is governed by antitrust laws. 2, if it wasn't for the oil companies, you wouldn't be able to drive your little Porsche around. And 3, I hate conspiracy theorists.
I drive a Ford.
Goodbye and good riddance. Hello, okay, you've got your soapbox. Make it quick.
I think that putting pictures of missing children on milk cartons is going a little bit too far.
Yeah, right. You ever lost a kid, pal? Why don't you get off your high horse and think about somebody else for a change?
I just don't think it's appropriate to put...
I'll tell you what's inappropriate, letting jerks like you on the air. Hello, you're on Mouth Off.
Hello, Herman.
Good, you know my name, you get a point. Now, show me your IQ's higher than 60.
You don't remember me.
What, are you kidding me? You're the one who thinks they should outlaw the baby on board signs, right? No, I don't know you, and frankly, I don't care.
Well, that's very unfortunate.
So's the price of wheat thins. Big deal.
You remember back in June, we had the lunch at Buena Vista.
Oh, yeah, and you asked for my autograph, and I said, hey, get out of my face. Can't you see I'm eating?
You had the turtle soup. I had the lasagna.
What is this? No, don't tell me. You want to talk about quiche?
No, I'd like to talk about babies.
Babies? What about them? They're cute, cuddly, a pain in the...
I'm sure it's all in the back of your mind somewhere. The budget 6 at Howard and 7th, a bottle of Grand Marnier.
This isn't Gloria, is it?
No, Gloria's the one with the little 4-year-old. She and I happened to have lunch with your wife.
My wife?
You know, she was very unhappy about our little lunch. I guess it was something she ate.
Well, look, thanks a lot. I really appreciate your point of view.
She has a gun.
A gun? Who?
Arlene.
My wife?
She should be there any moment. Some people have a casual attitude toward infidelity. Some people don't take sex seriously. Then there are the others who take sex very, very seriously.
Yeah, well, look, I'd really like to discuss this with you, but I think I better get the hell out of here.
Too late for that.
I'll just put a record on. See you folks tomorrow.
You're playing our song.
Oh, Jesus! Hey, the door's locked! Let me out of here! Let me out! Arlene! No, baby, don't do it! I can explain!
You've been listening to Rebels Without Applause in Mr. Handy's Do-It-Yourself Guide to Getting Everything You Could Possibly Imagine Done Around the House while Strengthening Your Abdominal Muscles and Learning French. The players were Don Schrump, Mark Halfmoon, and Zeke Richardson. Mr. and Mrs. Handy were played by Bill Treziak and Verona Sider.
Mr. Handy was written by Zeke Richardson and directed by Neil Whiteman. Mouth Off was written, produced, directed, and performed by Neil Whiteman, Diana Troxel, Barry Tanner, Zeke Richardson, and Mark Halfmoon. Special thanks to Eric Bowersfeld for providing script consultation. KZSC Santa Cruz and Hyde Street Studios in San Francisco.
If you wish to receive a catalog of Rebels Without Applause productions, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to Rebels Productions, 1388 Alabama, San Francisco, California, 94110.
This program was produced with funds provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting through National Public Radio's Satellite Program Development Fund. The program was produced by Rebels Productions, which is solely responsible for its content.